It's the Environmental Commission, the September 28th, 2023 electronic meeting. This meeting is in accordance with executive orders set in place in 2020 by the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct the meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. Please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment is welcome. It will be available via telephone only. To speak at public comment, which will be coming up, call 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 922-9696-1644. And with that, I'd like to ask Sean to read the land heritage statement.
Thank you. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, and Badewadmi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you, Sean. And now would you call roll, please?
All right. Okay. Councilmember Ackman. Vice Chairperson Brown. Commissioner Callawart. Commissioner Curtis.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Dale.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Dish.
Here.
Thank you.
In Ann Arbor. That's presupposed though, right? Unless we say, I'm in Las Vegas.
Thank you. Commissioner Graham. Commissioner Gruber.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Marson.
I'm here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Mirsky.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Chairperson Mitchell.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Nedrich.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. And Commissioner Whiting. All right. And that is a quorum. Barely, but it is a quorum.
Barely. Okay, great. Well, we'll proceed then. Thank you. I would like to ask for approval of the agenda. Would I have a motion to approve the agenda? From Commissioner Dale and seconded by Commissioner Gruber. Any discussion of the agenda? Any changes anyone would like to make? All right, hearing none. I would like a motion to approve the agenda. And everyone who wishes, say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And next, I'd like to discuss approval of the minutes from our August meeting. That was the 26th, I believe.
I move the minutes be approved as written.
For a second.
Is there a second? Okay, great. Moved and second by Mirsky and Gruber. Any discussion of the minutes? Okay, I would like to move a vote, call a vote, and shall we say aye or raise your hand?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. We'll now move on to public commentary, the first. And this is an opportunity for, oh, thanks, Sean. That's great. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 922-9696-1644. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand, press *9 on your phone. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Then press *6 to unmute your phone. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Thank you. And Sean, do you see anyone who's wishing to make a comment?
We do not yet have anyone on the line.
Okay, we'll give it about 30 seconds. All right, do you see anyone on the line waiting to
We
talk
do
with
not
us?
have any callers.
That's all right. Okay, thank you. So I would like to move on to our new business for today, which is a presentation of the Path to Citywide Recyclables by a group called Perpetual, or they'll be describing the program. And so I am not familiar with all of the people, so I will appreciate, Sean, some assistance from you in introductions, if you wouldn't mind.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Just as some brief background, this is building off of a pilot that was started by the city of Ann Arbor, along with 4 of our local restaurants. And since we have grown our group to include a whole bunch of wonderful organizations who are here tonight. So we have Samuel McMullen from zerowaste.org, a local nonprofit. We have Alex Danovich from Recycle Ann Arbor, which I'm sure most of you also know is a local nonprofit. And then we have Ellie Moss here from Perpetual, which is a national nonprofit that is helping out several different cities across the country with similar projects. And it looks like we also just are joined right now, let me promote them to panelist, by Yusuf from El Harissa and also with zerowaste.org. And with that, I will turn it over to Ellie. I think you're starting us off with the presentation. And you are on mute.
Yes, I will get us kicked off. So I will be able to share my screen. Looks like I will.
Should be able to.
There we go. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. We are all really excited about this project and excited to tell you about it. Our plan for our presentation is to give you some details about the project. Sean gave a little bit of background, but we'll give a little bit more and sort of where we've been, what we're doing, and where we're headed. Happy to answer any questions that you have about the project, or if we don't have an answer yet, we'll tell you when we will have an answer and how we can share that with you. We'll make sure that you understand opportunities to be involved and how to stay informed about this work. And then we're really open to whatever advice this group has for this work. So if that sounds okay, we will forge ahead. And I'm going to actually hand it over to Alex. I believe you are going to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk briefly about the scope of the problem and why recycling and composting alone aren't a solution. Obviously, plastics is a big problem. It threatens our climate, human health, and the environment. Yet, despite all of the interest in reducing plastics and all the attention it's getting, fossil fuel companies are continuing to make significant investments in extraction while making very little investments in recycling and even less in reuse. So these investments are projected to result in an additional 15 million tons of plastics being produced by 2027, and it's projected that less than 10% of that will be recycled. And so since 40% of all plastics is actually made into single-use packaging, reuse strategies like we're talking about tonight are really can have a huge impact. So next slide. Thanks. So new studies are continuing to come out that show microplastics and PFAS are significant issues in Southeast Michigan. We have some of the highest levels of microplastics in the Great Lakes region and some of our waters. And it's a serious ecosystem and human health issue that a lot of times it doesn't show up on a traditional life cycle analysis that might say, you know, should we use plastic packaging or metal or glass? A lot of times these ecosystem impacts and human health impacts don't show up. So it makes it a really important issue. Next slide. And so tipping up. Yeah, thanks. So most often the place we look to first is recycling and composting, but these strategies aren't the top of the zero waste hierarchy. You can see here that the top of the hierarchy is reduce, reuse, and reduction. So, even though at RAA, we've worked really hard to ensure the items that we collect for recycling are utilized for its highest and best use, recycling alone isn't enough. So most of the plastic in our waste stream, it's not recyclable, or it's downcycled and not recycled again. And this results in the continued need for extraction of fossil fuels. And then in terms of composting, unfortunately, compostable packaging as an alternative just doesn't compost well at the compost sites, which is why Ann Arbor's composter recently stopped accepting it. So it's really not a viable solution either. Go to the next slide, thanks. There's some basic factors that determine if something's recyclable, like ability to sort it at our MRF, the value of the material, the volume that's generated. Unfortunately, with plastics, a lot of it's made of mixed materials. It's got a lot of toxicity issues. And at the end of the day, one of the most important factors is manufacturers are able to use really cheap virgin resins. That makes it really hard to compete with recycling and the cost that goes into sorting, cleaning, and using recycled plastics. So this makes recycling really challenging for plastic. And so even when an item can be recycled, it doesn't mean we should. It's not always the best strategy to invest in. So it's important to understand the full life cycle impacts to guide the investments to ensure that the direction we go provides the most benefit to the community. Over 90% of emissions from plastics come from the production and conversion of fossil fuels, not from the disposal. So if recycling doesn't decrease the demand for extraction by new products, it's not really solving the problem. So systems like reuse address the need for extraction and manufacturing upstream. And that's why, RAA is really excited to be engaged in this as an opportunity to move up the hierarchy beyond recycling. And we're also looking for opportunities to leverage the existing community investments that we've made in recycling that might have a potential to make reuse more cost-effective, convenient, or even lower transportation emissions. Let's go to the next slide. So, from extraction to manufacturing to disposal, single-use plastics releases harmful toxic emissions and greenhouse gases at every phase of its life cycle. And this mostly impacts the communities where these facilities are located. And those are often, disproportionately communities of color. So it's a really, it's an environmental justice issue as well as a human health and ecosystem issue. So, these emissions along the whole phase would be completely avoided every time you reuse an item instead of have to extract resources to make a new one. And that's why, at RA, we feel recycling alone is not a viable or effective solution for the majority of single-use plastic packaging, and that it's really important for recycling advocacy to be complemented by strong reduction and reuse strategies, which is why this work is so important. And we really appreciate the leadership the city's shown on this and being part of this collaborative effort. So I think with that, it's going to Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Alex. I am so happy to be here. Thank you for taking the time. I'm Sam McMullen, Executive Director at zerowaste.org. In my little section, I'm going to cover what role reuse plays, a little bit of how this might work for those of you who aren't familiar. Hopefully answer the question whether it can be done successfully, and give you a little bit of the history of the program. So let's get into it. I'm just going to take a second because I'm really excited that we're talking about this with you all. This is awesome, a dream come true. Okay, so this slide is from a report about plastic leakage into the ocean. It's, if you'll see circled, that's that wedge. This is looking at a business as usual case on the top line, and then all the reduction possibilities in a sort of system change case. And you'll see that reuse is the biggest lever that we have to curb plastic going into the ocean. I really love, there was in the reports by Pew Charitable Trust, right above this, they say there is a credible path to significantly reduce plastic leakage into the ocean, and it requires solutions to be implemented concurrently, ambitiously, and starting immediately. I love that. It's not a panacea, it's not the whole thing, but it is something that we need to do quickly right out the gate. And it's a really important lever to pull. this is sort of the role that reuse is going to play on the broader scheme. Thank you. Yeah, Ellie, you got it. That was perfect. But this is obviously not, if it were easy, it would have been done already. It's a complex challenge. But there's huge upside. There's upside for the economy. As you can see, it localizes supply chains. It brings things right into Ann Arbor or Washtenaw County. Less waste to manage. It's not a hit for business. In fact, it creates jobs. It's good for people. It's a better experience. There's less toxicity if you choose your containers right. Obviously, you're not sending as much to landfill, not sending as much, not using many greenhouse gases. There was actually a study done at the University of Michigan, a life cycle analysis, a parametric life cycle analysis, which allows you to play with different factors and say, oh, how about we drive the containers an extra 50 miles, see what that does? How about we wash the containers a couple more times or wash them hotter or whatever? So that was it's a really good tool that we're going to be able to use to make sure that we're never compromising the environmental sustainability. If you can imagine, you make a more durable container, obviously more goes into making that container, and it only comes out right if you use it enough. So getting a lot of uses out of containers and not having too much leakage, not too many containers that disappear is important. Next slide, please, Ellie. Thank you. So how might this work? What's the vision? What does it look like? I'm going to go through pretty quickly because we haven't made strong definitive decisions, but we have had experience and we know what the general framework is. And thanks to Perpetual, they bring a ton of system design expertise as well. So we know what the universe of options is like. And basically, you'll see in yellow a nice sort of Ann Arbor theme. In yellow is the customer journey. In blue is the logistics journey. So we'll start with the customers. They check it out by one of any number of ways. It could be a scan. It could be connected to their credit card. Obviously, we're looking for the easiest, most equitable checkout process, meaning that people who don't have access to a credit card can still check out a container. They check it out. When they're done using it, when they would have thrown it in the trash, they put it in a return bin. One of the things we found in the life cycle analysis is that if you make a dedicated trip just to return a cup, that all of a sudden single use looks better. So what's really important there, the important conclusion there is to make the return bins as convenient as possible. So that's customer journey done. You check it out, you put it back, you're not charged anything. If in the way that we're thinking about it, you wouldn't be charged anything if you just use it and bring it back as you normally would. Then of course there's all of the logistics to back this up. So this is a new version, a new supply chain basically that we would have to institute, but it's a really exciting one. Return bin, people put cups in the return bin, they get picked up ideally by as low carbon an option as possible. You see someone on a cargo bike there, that's awesome. Picked up, taken to a sanitizing facility, washed, sanitized, inspected, make sure that we're sending out good quality cups out the other end, sent back out. This is called reverse logistics, back out to the restaurants. Restaurants, in the way we're thinking about it right now, of course, we're still in the system design phase, so this is all open for discussion and for smarter minds than mine, like people on this commission to poke holes in. But that restaurants would pay a similar cost to what they pay for disposables. That we look to displace the spend on disposable containers. So that's generally how the system works. As you can tell, this is grossly simplified. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. We're here for them. Excited to answer them as they come up, but this is the general flow. Okay, so next slide. This has been done before. These kinds of systems exist. It exists in Ann Arbor. You can do this. The challenge that we're coming up against is can it be done successfully? Can it be done at a scale where you can say, I'm really proud of we're actually displacing single-use plastic. Like we're doing something meaningful here. We're participating in that chunk that you saw at the beginning of my little section. and that's been a little bit tougher to get to. And the issue is scale. You can't, if you start small, it's really hard to get big. So the insight that Perpetual came to us with, and I'm so grateful for, is that this needs to be done at a much larger scale. It needs to be coordinated, needs to be citywide, needs to be a big public sustained effort with lots of buy-in from across a lot of sectors, so that we can get the kind of volume that we need to support this kind of system, and so that it's not for restaurants where the ultra committed people are going to come in and use the system, and no one else will do it because they're confused by it. They've never seen it before. It's new. Oh, I have to do this checkout. I'll just do the single use one. So this insight that Perpetual has come with about immersive scale being a real linchpin in making a system work and sustainable in the long term, we've really bought into, because we lived the alternative. We lived the small scale, the challenges of trying to figure out a good washing solution for 50 cups a day. Good luck making the real estate work on that. So getting to a good volume right off the bat is a really important step, and that's what drove this project to the scale that it's at now, and we're really excited for that. Ellie, I'm sure you'll be able to elaborate on that if you need to. I just want to talk briefly, little sidebar, about where we've come from. So this was started by OSI. This program was started by OSI with Zingerman's and El Harissa. Yusuf is here from El Harissa. A couple of years ago. We were not involved in that initial pilot. It was great. They learned a lot. We came in and tried to brush up some of the tech bits and bring on these partners. Bringing on the partners was a really important move, because we did not have the capability, the logistics, the labor, any of the things that we needed in place to make this work at a large scale. And so we're really, really lucky to have a recycler who sees the problem this way. We're really lucky to have Perpetual here with all their design expertise, and we're really lucky to be in a city that takes this seriously and is willing to lead this effort. It's really exciting. To me, it feels like a sort of a perfect storm, and I can't wait for it to go down. So Sean and Yusuf were both in from the very beginning, and then we stepped in to help sort of administer the program. And following that, Recycling and Arbor and Perpetual got involved, which brought the possibilities just got so much bigger. So how do we think about this larger scale system? I'm sure you have questions about why make that call for the bigger scale, but if you'll just stick with me for a second, that it's the way to go. How do we think about it? Ellie, next slide. So there are really 4 elements that we need to look at. Economic viability. Can this be sustained as its own thing? What kind of funding mechanisms do we need to have in place to make this work? Ideally, this is something that becomes a basic service of the city, and exactly how that plays out cost-wise is still, it's all the clay is still moist, so time for feedback right now, but making sure this is economically viable, making sure that the per use fee isn't too onerous on businesses, making sure that this is something that can work is really important. Obviously, sort of baseline condition, environmental viability. We don't want to set something up, like I was saying earlier, we don't want to set something up that technically is reuse and in practice is worse for the environment than single use. That's a failure on our part. So we got to keep that front and center. Technical viability, just making sure that all the systems work. The washing works, everything is as promised, and we're not sort of failing on the underlying service provision that is the sort of promise of this system, which is that you can have cups as a service or containers as a service rather than containers as a good. And then social viability, making sure that this is not something that violates our basic understanding of everyone should have access to this kind of thing. No one should be excluded for for any reason, really. Making sure that everyone in Ann Arbor has a fair shot at using this and no one feels left out. So those are the 4 sort of parameters that we're working with, and Ellie's going to take you through some more of the system design and timeline. They have been such an important and exciting partner to have. Yeah, so I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Alex. You guys have gotten us off to a very strong start in this presentation. So my name is Ellie. I am the executive director of Perpetual, and you've already heard a little bit about us. Perpetual is a nonprofit. As Sean said, we're a national nonprofit, and we were really founded with the intention of helping bring reuse systems to scale, on the recognition that reuse, when it is subscale, doesn't work very well and isn't going to unlock those benefits that we saw on that first chart with the purple wedges. So the role that Perpetual aims to play, we are not here to operate the system. So we're not going to be washing dishes in Ann Arbor. What we are going to do is support and facilitate the overall process needed to go from where we are today to having that full-fledged system in place and running. The Perpetual team brings significant technical expertise. My colleague and co-founder Dagny Tucker actually ran and operated. She founded and ran a reusable cup program in 3 different US cities over about 8 years, starting in 2015. So she has very good and real on the ground expertise. And one of the reasons she gave that up and said, I can't do this anymore, is because she recognized that the larger system design piece is such a key for this to be successful, and that single operators are just not going to be able to do it on their own. You need this larger structure in place for this to work. And so that business is not something she is involved in anymore, and she's fully committed to the system design that we are working in Ann Arbor to facilitate. Perpetual plays a role in helping to mobilize funding. So we write a lot of grants on behalf of partners, on behalf of cities, as a way to try to bring as much funding as possible into the system. As Sam mentioned, we believe that reuse can be a self-sustaining system over time, but the more of a jumpstart that we can provide by providing grant funding and other very affordable funding to get the initial infrastructure in place, the faster we can get to that self-sustaining model, get to scale, get the volume going. Perpetual's in this for the long haul. So we are here to facilitate this process now, and we're going to be around until well after things have kind of gone started. We really want to be that extra support that helps things work in a really big and significant way. We also are really excited about the work that Ann Arbor is willing to do in this, and Perpetual is partnering with 3 other cities as well. So Ann Arbor is one of 4 cities that we are currently focused on doing this similar process in. Each city is distinct in a number of ways. I'm really excited about some of the unique things about what Ann Arbor is able to do. But we want cities like Ann Arbor to become models for other cities to look at and say, oh, if Ann Arbor can do it, we can do it. And now we understand how. So it's really kind of a demonstration project in some ways of proving the case for reuse such that it can be adopted in a very accelerated way by many additional cities. Next slide, I will say to myself. So we have a lot of different partners that we work with on this. So there's the partners that you've met on this call who are our partners in Ann Arbor. Additionally, we are working with a number of academic partners and other also program partners. The University of Michigan, Sam mentioned the life cycle assessment tool. That is a tool that was built and has been published about by Professor Dr. Greg Kulian at the Center for Sustainable Systems at University of Michigan, and a staff scientist, Christian Hitt. And so we work with them every week on informing this LCA, testing different scenarios, making sure that whatever system will be implemented is going to be environmentally better than the alternatives of disposables. We have a couple of other academic partners as well. The Circularity Informatics Lab is led by Dr. Jenna Jambeck. If you follow the world of plastic waste, you may have heard her name. She's been doing a lot of interesting work in this space for many years. This is an assessment, or this lab does an assessment called the Circularity Assessment Protocol, which is essentially a system level baseline of what's happening now, what materials are coming into the community, how are they circulating, what's ending up overflowing trash bans, what's ending up in streets, what's ending up at the MRF. So it gives us kind of a before, so that once the system is up and running, we can compare that before to the after that we're creating and have a real sense of what the change has been. The University of Chicago has a Data Science Institute team that is working with us on different types of modeling around placement of assets, efficient routing. How do you think about the logistics, the reverse and forward logistics in a way that's going to be really optimized and make a lot of sense in this system? And then the SCAD, which is the Savannah College of Art and Design, they're in Savannah, which is actually one of our other partner cities. And they have a Design for Good course that is doing some interesting design work for us on a number of different topics. Happy to go into that another time, but in the interest of time, I'm going to forge ahead. We also partner with the US EPA's Trash Free Waters program, and PR3, which is a program of Resolve, an NGO. They are working on standards for reuse and reusable packaging, generally reusable foodware and packaging. And so we are both working with them to make sure that we are aligned with the standards that they're creating, and also using these 4 cities as a way to provide feedback to them on where the standards seem to be working and are appropriate, and where the standards need to be refined based on what's happening in the ground, you know, based on not just theoretical reuse, but actual real reuse. Oh, I guess I've already spoken to these, so I'll skip these. So this is the circular assessment protocol, which I just spoke to, and then Dr. Keelian. Both really wonderful resources and great partners in this project. And then this is the data science. So you'll have these slides if you want to go back and read them, but I think I've probably covered it by now. So just to give you a sense of our process and where we are, we started working together kind of the early days over a year ago, I guess, you know, back sort of in spring of 2022, just really starting to explore, you know, what could this look like? Is Ann Arbor a good place to do something like this? What are some of the community assets that exist? How might we approach this kind of a program together? You know, working out the details of partnerships, all that kind of stuff. Some of the work that Perpetual has been doing additionally to support this type of design work is engaging with corporates to understand, we really want this system to be designed by and for local communities, but it'll be important from a volume perspective and from ultimately an impact perspective to have corporates be able to participate in the system as well. You know, all of the cups that you see going in and out of, even thinking about gas stations, convenience stores, you know, Chick-fil-A, like all the places. I actually don't know if there's a Chick-fil-A in Ann Arbor. There probably is somewhere. They seem to be everywhere. But any fast food that you want to think of, giving them the opportunity and knowing that the system can be available to them will enhance the impact and enhance the user behavior impact as well. You know, if the more normalized this can be for any and all populations, the more effective it's going to be. Perpetual's also done an extensive reuse capabilities landscape. I think we're actually over 40 now, of speaking to people who are operators, the reuse service providers that are actually running these systems on the ground today, to make sure that as we think about the different design choices that we want to make in Ann Arbor, that we're not being wishful or fanciful in terms of what's possible, but we're actually grounding that design work in what people are operating, even if it's at a small scale, but in other places around the world, so that we know that we can effectively draw on the people who are most successful and doing the best work in other places, and make sure that whatever we stand up in Ann Arbor is going to draw on the best reuse programs that are happening around the world. So that's all work that has been done before today. Where we are now is really in the sort of the orange box, continuing with community design input. We did have a week of community design workshops back in May, where all of the teams got together and ran a series of workshops. There was some at the public library. There was one at the recycling drop-off center. There was one at the farmers market, and we had also a meeting at Bloom, the Mead Works in town, which was a discussion of other community leaders understand, you know, what this is and, you know, how they can be a part of it. So that process continues. We are really committed to making sure that the design process is inclusive and that we are hearing from all perspectives, so that we ensure that when the design is finalized, that it is representing a system that's going to work for the whole community. The life cycle assessment is ongoing, as we've mentioned. We do also have a 5-year financial model that we use to understand different versions of how the system can work and what that tells us about what's a viable price per use for these things. If that's the revenue model that's chosen, how much volume does it take to make it worth it to drive a truck or a bike around all day, picking things up and then putting them through a washing machine. So really looking at all of the different operational pieces of this and understanding what's will work and what is less likely to work. And we have weekly meetings now with our design group, which involves it's a growing number of folks, and that is how we're working through these design decisions piece by piece. As you can see, we are still relatively early in this process, and there's a lot of work left to be done. At a high level, how we imagine this going is the design process, continues for quite a while. And then we ultimately get to a point where we say, okay, the design is ready. We have mobilized the funding that's needed. We've gotten ready to actually go ahead with this. And then we begin setup, which is the beginning of implementation. And there's a timeline at the top of this page, which I would say is an optimistic timeline. I don't think it's impossible, but I think that there will be many things that need to happen for this to be exactly where we end up. And as you can see from these columns, which really are sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the work that needs to happen, you can just get a sense of how we get the system set up. We move to pre-launch, the system can be launched, and then there's an ongoing period of improvement and refinement over time. So that should give you a sense of how this can work. And the devil is in the details. It's amazing to me how it's really a very simple idea, this idea of reusing a cup, but actually putting it into practice at scale is devilishly complex. Absolutely doable, but it requires a lot of careful thought and planning. I wanted to walk you through the system design framework that we are using, just to give you a sense of the kinds of conversations that our system planning group is having. And then that is the last of the slides, and we're happy to answer questions and make sure that we don't take up the whole meeting here. So there's 3 slides here that represent the system design framework. And in each case, what we have here is sort of what is the design decision to be made? And we think about these as design requirements in the sense of this is how the system in Ann Arbor will seek to operate. And so this is our chance to say, this is how, of all the options, of all the different tech platforms that one might use, we recommend choosing a tech platform that has these different characteristics and these elements. And so this just gives a sense of, for a tech platform, this is where we specify what are all the things that are most important to this system around how an asset management platform will work. The tech platform is basically sort of like the database of record, if that makes sense. It's the single source of truth on inventory and how, where things are at any given time. Part of how we think about this is we expect that reuse systems need to be able to handle more than one provider. It doesn't mean that they will, but that we should be thoughtful as we design them to allow for multiple providers, and then thinking about how to make sure that the design can provide for that should we end up in a situation of needing multiple providers. The reason we think that's important is just because there are very few organizations, I might even say none, that do every single one of these things really well. And so being able to, if we want to kind of bring the best of the best, we're going to want to probably draw on certain aspects from one provider, certain aspects from a different provider, so that the whole thing fits together and is the best thing that we can achieve. So tech platform is one piece, the actual assets themselves. So whether it's cups or containers, what do we want it to be? What should it be made out of? How big should it be? How many should we have? Where are we starting with? What do we expect to, move to over, year 2 and year 3? So these are all things that get specified in this design document. Asset tracking is another decision to be made, whether you use an RFID tag, a QR code, maybe both, maybe something else. So there's a lot of different decisions to be thought about there. In terms of the front end tech, so this is on that chart that Sam was discussing. Right now, some systems use an app. Some systems use a QR code scan. Some systems just use a simple tap. So as you are checking out your cup, you just tap your cup on an RFID reader, it links it to your credit card transaction, and you're good to go. So there's a lot of different options there. We need to define what are the ones that we think are going to work best in Ann Arbor based on everything that we know about the community and about the kind of the frontier of technology today. Collection bins. So there's a whole decision here around what types of bins do we want? Do we want tech-enabled bins? Do we want analog bins? Do we want some of each? Are we going to actually try to leverage co-collection with recyclables, which is something we have a really exciting opportunity to test with Recycle Ann Arbor as a partner? Are there ways to leverage existing recycling infrastructure for reuse, and how might we do that? So again, this is another area where there's just lots of interesting questions to look at, and And this is exactly where this sort of landscape of capabilities comes in, and our sort of deep knowledge of how this works in practice, so we can have conversations not just about what sounds ideal and lovely, but what we think can actually work in practice. Another set of design requirements to consider is washing. So which type of washing machine should be used? How does the thinking about how you leverage existing washing capacity in the community versus adding new washing capacity, and requirements for who the washing operator could be. Sam talked a bit about logistics. So there's work to be done thinking about how should things get picked up. Maybe some things get picked up by bike, other things get picked up, with an electric cargo van. How do we think about what the ideal would be there, and how do we work that out? Surge events. So we know there are some very wonderful festivals and music events and art events that happen in Ann Arbor throughout the year, and that can often create surge moments where maybe the existing inventory of the system will not be sufficient, and the capacity of the washing and the logistics is not going to be sufficient to keep up with demand at those events. So how do we handle that? There, you can have extra inventory so that you're able to, keep up with that when it happens, but then those assets are all just sitting around the rest of the year. So it's a lot, it can be a lot of money to sit on the shelves most of the time. And there's different ways to look at that. You can have additional providers come in and support when needed. You can have contract providers for certain aspects of it, if not a whole system extra provider. Return incentives is a really important one. And I don't know that we'll get into all the details on this today, but one of the things we do know is that you cannot achieve the return rate needed for the system to be economically or environmentally sustainable without providing a tangible incentive for return, typically a financial incentive for return. So this is something that we need to look at very carefully and understand what are the pros and cons of different options. So some people use deposits. We know that there's some pros and cons of using deposits. Other systems charge a fee if you return it late, or charge you a non-return fee to replace the item. So all of that is stuff that we've looked at in great detail. Additionally, it's really important that any item have value for anyone to return to the system, so that if I pay a deposit on something and then I abandon it, someone else should be able to pick it up and go get that deposit. Or if it's attached to my credit card, I'm going to get charged for it, but we still want someone to pick up the cup. And so how do we make sure that that's going to happen? So like a redemption value can be an interesting way to look at that, where people who are motivated to pick up things with redemption value, maybe bottles or cans, which I know that exists in Michigan. So could we piggyback on that idea to make sure that items are making their way back into the system to be used again and again? Almost done. Just a couple more to highlight here. Governance is a really important question. These are systems that have not been established in this way really anywhere in the world yet. And we think that's really important to think carefully about how a system like this, we're going to work really hard to get community input into the initial design, but that's not the end of the story. We hope these systems will operate for generations in Ann Arbor, and we need to make sure there continues to be the right types of oversight and opportunities for input, and for this to be shaped and managed over time. And so the thinking about the role of the city, is the city the governance model, or is it the city plus other entities that are co-governing this? It's something that we need to figure out. So that's a really interesting piece of this puzzle. The last three I think are pretty straightforward. Labor, it's a chance to say how we want to, what kind of requirements we want to set for the people who will be actually working in the system. One great thing about reuse is that it's a job creating business, because you actually need to move stuff around and wash it and get it back where it's going. Communications is a huge piece of this. That's probably a whole other presentation another time, but making sure you're using the right messaging. We're working closely with some behavioral experts to make sure that we think about how to talk about the system and how to make sure everyone feels like it is for them and feels like they understand why and how to use it. And then finally, the revenue model, which is last but certainly not least, is to understand exactly how the system pays for itself over time, and what are the different uses of different types of funding that might be available to support the system. Oh my goodness, I know that was a lot. I apologize. No one seems to have nodded off. That is it for now. So I'm going to drop the slides. I'm happy to put them back up if that's helpful at any point, but I can't really see you all. So We, the collective team, are happy to answer. And oh, but no, there's one more slide. I completely forgot. My fault. Let me put this slide. No, there's 2 more slides. I apologize. I thought that was it, but I forgot to tell you how you can stay involved. And that's obviously a really important part of this. And I also forgot to tell you about funding. So this gives you a sense of how this work has been funded so far. So we have 4 funders that are supporting the work of the nonprofits collectively on this work. The funding for the University of Michigan's LCA has come from Morgan Stanley. The funding for the research that the University of Georgia is doing is coming from EPA. And then additional support has actually come from the A20 program. So that's really important to know and understand. And then I think this is in fact, there we go, the last slide. So it's really important to us that this be a transparent and kind of inclusive process. So we wanted you to know how this is working. So I mentioned already that we meet weekly as a multi-stakeholder group to work through the design process and coordinate all aspects of the project. And you can see the members of that group here. We also have regular communication. So Sam sends out a very short update email every week or 2 that has just kind of the headlines of what's been going on. And we also have a newsletter that will go out to a much broader list every 6 weeks or so. And you're welcome to sign up for that. At that link, you'll have the option to sign up for as many of our cities as you are interested in, as well as a general newsletter. If you sign up for all of them, you will get a newsletter every Tuesday, and you can pick and choose. It's sort of on a rotating basis. So once we've actually got a solid draft of the system design, there will be many opportunities to weigh in on that. So certainly look forward to the opportunity to get your input at that stage, but happy to have your input now or at any moment between now and then or after that. Okay, that really is the end of the slides. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Ali, and everyone. I appreciate seeing this information, and I guess I want to ask one particular question, and then I would like to open it to the group. Is this program already in a contractual phase? Is the city planning to implement it beyond what the original pilot has been? Is that a decision that's been made?
I can take this one. The facilitating the process of scaling this program is in our contract with the city, our circular economy services contract. No, the city has made no commitments, long-term commitments about participating in this program in particular, but they are funding the development. We're working towards that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Is that fair, Sean?
Any questions from others? I hope.
I have a few. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, let's do the raise hand thing. That would be helpful. Yeah, John Mirsky, please.
I've written down about 10 points and I won't go through them, but I will send them to Sam, who I interface with regularly. And I don't think any of them necessarily would benefit from a lot of discussion here. So I think maybe I just send them to you, Sam. Maybe just one question with Anya involved is U of M dining and or vendors that are on U of M properties at all involved in this program? And the other ones, like I said, I'll just leave it at that, and I'll send an email, and I'd be happy to be a sparring partner on any of the points that I send. Some of them you probably will just discard because they're nonsense, but I'll still throw them out there. So, but go ahead, Anya, you can take it from there, and you can maybe answer my question.
Sam can probably answer it even more. Yes, I think they're part of the conversation. I think they're not in a position to be, any sort of operator. But I think this is something that we are hoping that it's very much a city and Ann Arbor thing, using the same services and have it be fluid across that boundary, because the fluid between Ann Arbor and U of M, or the boundary is fluid between those two. So yeah, they're part of the conversation, for sure. Sam, I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
Yeah. Allison from Anya's office did an incredible job gathering stakeholders, and we're having a meeting tomorrow with just a powerhouse list of UMich stakeholders to say, hey, how might this work? And I know Ellie, you are in contact with the corporate that services certain aspects of both the public schools and the university. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sodexo?
Yeah, Sodexo. And actually, there's multiple service providers for the University of Michigan. Sodexo is one of them, and there's at least one other. Maybe there's two others, and so they're planning on joining the meeting tomorrow as well, along with procurement and a lot of other folks. So tomorrow is going to be the first full group with all the University of Michigan stakeholders. That's going to be a very large and exciting meeting. But it sounds so far like, yeah, as Ani was saying, like there's certainly interest, and if this system that is being designed, sort of spearheaded by the city, can ultimately act as a service that serves both the city and the university, so much the better, right? We get volume, everyone gets lower prices. So that's really a path that we're interested in looking at.
Brooks?
So on the containers, have you thought about selling like naming rights to the containers?
This is a question that often comes up. Yes, we've thought about it, and it's something that is part of the conversation. There's pros and cons to it. Anything that makes something feel like a souvenir is not as helpful as something that feels, they should be, the way we think about the design is they should be something that people are excited to use and excited to give back. We don't want people to be getting too attached to them. What we think about more rather than naming rights is, when we think about the corporates, some corporates are very attached to having their logo on things. A lot of local restaurants just have non-branded foodware, so there's no issue with kind of a universal design there. But for companies that are really attached to having their brand, we think it's absolutely possible for branded items to circulate in the system, but they would cost a little bit more for those companies because there's an extra sortation cost. So that's more commonly what people want when they want to brand the items, is they want their brand on it. I'll stop there. It's certainly something we could talk further about, but it's a great question. And it's one that often comes up.
Anya, did you have more? I'm sorry, I didn't. Sorry, go ahead.
That's fine. I have lots of questions. But I'm also assuming that a lot of the questions I have are things people are still working through around the logistics. I think, about who actually does the picking up and the washing and all those things. But two things that you might have some insight on at this point is, do you picture it all coming back to a centralized place for washing and then redistribution, or would it more likely follow a model where there's like sort of regional hubs that do it at a smaller scale? That's first question. The second one is part of your analysis and eventual recommendations going to be about, does the city hire somebody? Because I imagine this is quite a bit as it grows, to do the administration aspect of it, right? So is that something that gets hired as a position from the city, or is that something that's contracted out to a different entity? I mean, is that going to be part of the discussion and recommendations as well?
I'm happy to jump in on those. Sam, happy to tag team with you. I'll answer the second one first, because that's the one that I can remember right now. That's part of the governance conversation. And so it really depends on what role the city wants to play. I think there could be a world where the city of Ann Arbor says, we would like to create this framework and we would like to walk away from it and let some other entity own and manage it. You can have, if the system is self-supporting from a revenue perspective, it can be just an operating business that the city oversees to some degree. So it doesn't need to require staff time from the city. It doesn't need to require oversight. If the city wants to own some of the assets, for example, let's say the city is successful in getting a bunch of grant funding and wants to own they want to own the bins, they want to own the washing machine, whatever, then the city is in a position of deciding, do we want to hire people to operate these? Do we want to contract that out? So I think there's still a lot of options in that scenario. We haven't gone down any particular path yet in Ann Arbor. I'll tell you, one of the other cities we're working in is Galveston, Texas. And in that case, what we'll be doing is actually establishing a nonprofit that will serve as the governance entity for the system. And the nonprofit will be funded by a portion of the system revenue will include representatives from business, representatives from government, representatives from community organizations, and that will be the oversight entity. So then they'll have a part-time executive director that kind of oversees the management of the system. And but the city has no responsibility really, other than stepping a person beyond that committee. So I hope that answers the question. There's a broad continuum of options for the role that the city might choose to play. I think your first question was around, was it logistics, or was that a question that you teed up but didn't ask?
Like very centralized collection and
Yes,
washing
thank
and
you.
redistribution, or more like hubs?
So that's something that we're looking at in the through the LCA model. And it comes down to how much volume we think there will be, because if you're going to have multiple dishwashers, you want to make sure they're all operating at capacity. Otherwise, it's really to your benefit to have one dishwasher in one place that hopefully is not too far from anywhere, but that can just be the utilization can be maximized. And you'd be amazed, some of these dishwashers, their capacity is like, there's dishwashers with the capacity to wash like 100,000 units an hour or something, just really, really, really massive. That might be a little bit overstated, but like to maybe 10,000 units an hour, I think I'm getting my number. But anyway, massively powerful dishwashers where it's like humans can't even keep up with it. You have to build these additional systems that automate the loading and the unloading of dishwashers. So we will make a data-driven decision based on the tools that we have, basically. Another thing that, and I'll use Galveston as an example because they're just a little further along in the design process. In Galveston, there are certain restaurants that want to be able to do washing for the system because they'll get a better price on the the per wash items that they're using. And so you can end up with a kind of a hybrid model where you have these little restaurants that have extra capacity for washing can do some of the washing for you as long as they can be certified to the right standard, and you still have your main washing facility to cover most of the washing. So that can be another way to help manage things. Cool, thanks, Sonia. I hope that answered your questions.
Councilmember Dish.
Thank you. This is really exciting to see how far this has come since May, and not just since May, but since a couple of years ago when even the pilot happened. So I'm wowed and thrilled. And I have a couple questions. So getting back to an important point that Samuel made is that for this to be something that's attractive to corporates and to individual restaurants, the reusables have to displace the cost of they have to displace disposables, and so they have to be more cost effective than disposables. And I'm sure that you've thought this through, but currently disposables, some of the cost of disposables are externalized because you landfill it, and nobody makes you pay for landfilling it there. You pay your solid waste fee, but nobody's going to raise that fee when the reusables come to town. And so I'm just wondering I think that there has to be, yes, a financial bonus to shifting from disposables to reusables, but there also just has to be a culture shift where consumers won't go to restaurants that give them mountains of disposables, and restaurants see a benefit in being demarcated as, here you can get your Middle Eastern food and you can bring back the containers. There are other places where they're going to hand you disposables, but we won't. So yeah, if you can speak to that question of how we deal with that, and then I have a couple more questions.
It's an excellent point. Where the system we're in is broken in so many ways, and in ways that makes it harder to do something better. Point well taken. I think there are exciting opportunities for the city to play a role in whatever way that it can, given the state level policies that exist, and maybe sort of working on that state level stuff as well, to pull any policy levers that would make it easier to make this happen. There's also in the governance conversation a chance for the city to take on levels of leadership that are, the road is open ahead of us. One thing I will say is that, especially with the compost decision that just got made from the composter, and Yusuf, you might be the best person to talk to this. In fact, can you just talk a little bit about that purchasing decision from a restaurant perspective?
All right, just unmuting myself. Yeah, I mean, we were talking a bit, Sam, last week about like how to incentivize businesses to make this transition. And I really just think it comes down to some external benefits, because it will be difficult for it to be like, I think in at the beginning, to be competitive with disposables, specifically like styrofoam, right? We mentioned, I mean, there are some businesses that are still using these extremely cheap disposables that that it would be just, very difficult to compete with. But it's if this is working at capacity, in theory, you could, because at El Harissa, we devote an incredible amount of our square footage to just storage of disposables. And if this program is working smoothly, you could, in theory, reclaim a great bit of your physical space and devote it to other operations. I mean, there are a lot of these kind of knock-on effects that I think stand to have an economic benefit to businesses beyond just the initial expenditure on getting this stock in place. But yeah, Lisa, you really touched on it. I think ultimately it comes down to like a big culture shift, and not only within the consumer base, but within kind of the community of business owners in Ann Arbor. And I do think that there is already a sizable cohort of businesses, and we've communicated with a lot of them, who are like really on board with this. But to make it a really truly citywide, and in theory beyond that, wide program, it's going to require a shift from customers and initiatives to get them to reach out to local business owners, restaurants that they love to go to, but feel kind of morally compromised to attend because they're receiving their food in disposables. And reaching out to these business owners and telling them that we love your food, but we really, would appreciate if you would at least consider this program. And then we can explore ways of easing new businesses into this program, letting them be able to test it out and see for themselves that it is a viable kind of replacement for the status quo.
That's really wonderful. And Yusuf, you bring a really important perspective to this, because you've just stuck with this the whole time. And coming to your place, you can get any dish in reusables. There isn't like, some of the restaurants that piloted this with us initially was there was one thing on the menu that they would do. That doesn't work. So, but I think that what I take from what you just said was that just as we are worried about making sure that this doesn't feel punitive to consumers, it needs to not feel punitive to businesses either. We need to really make it something that they want to do. And I think it's really interesting that you're saying that there are other financial benefits that you might get other than just that you don't have to buy disposables anymore. So this is another thing that I wanted to bring up was that the return incentives issue, because this is from the consumer perspective. And I have on top of my refrigerator right now, I think 8 or 9 containers from El Harissa.
Give it back.
We'll bring back. But
that's where they all win. Oh my gosh.
No, and I have to do. Now I hope that's not your whole stock.
No.
But you saw me. I mean, that was 3 weeks ago that I think I was at your place and brought food. And the thing is that I don't go by El Harissa very often. And so I will take them back. It would be, I hope that we would have bins, and also that you could return at any participating restaurant, because I definitely eat takeout more than once a month. And but the other places that I tend to take out don't have this program. And so for me, the ideal way of dealing with it is every time I go for takeout, I just take the things off my fridge and I take them with me. And so that would be that. I'm sure you're all thinking about that, but I just wanted to put that in because otherwise I might not want to take reusables because I don't want to be fined for not being able to return them. And, you know, like many people in Ann Arbor, a lot of things are very closely timed for me. So to commit to something that means an extra trip, especially an extra car trip, which I don't want to make, is more difficult. So, and then, so you're all nodding, so I know you get that. And then just what I remember from May, Ellie, was that the goal was, I think, some percentage of entities participating in just one piece of reusable. It sounds like that won't hit the scale that you all are now thinking about. And I wondered if that is still the goal and you feel like that would hit the scale that you're thinking about, or do you have a different goal in mind for what would count as success?
I think that there's a couple different numbers that we need to look at. There's part of the analysis that we have done and will continue doing is what is the total volume of disposables of different kinds being used in Arbor? How many cups, how many containers, you know, how many, ramekins? Like there's a lot of different things to look at. I think it would be smart to launch the system with one type of item. So either only cups or only containers or something just to reduce complexity. And so to get people sort of up the learning curve. Ultimately, though, I think for the system economics to work, you do want many, if not sort of all different types of disposables replaced by reusables. So there's a couple different answers. Like there's the answer based on the economics, but there's also the answer based on behavior change. And I think even if there are restaurants that are reluctant to do it for all of their items, having them adopt as many items as they're willing to, at least then everywhere people go, they see the option and it normalizes it and it becomes part of people's habits. So we want participation to be as broad as possible. And we want there to be a phased approach that allows the system to get up and running successfully with enough volume fast enough, but without drowning in its own complexity as everyone's still learning how things need to work. Is that a sufficient answer for today?
That's helpful. And I can see that cups might be a pretty high volume thing. And so a fairly easy thing to start out with. But I feel like from a behavior change standpoint, things like ramekins would be bigger because that's what we're doing when we take out food. We're taking out packages of things. And so it would be so nice to not have to cringe every time I do
Every
that.
time.
Yeah.
I hear you.
I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. And one is just, I think you just touched on it, but how are you going to set a baseline, in terms of the volumes that will be displaced from landfill? Is that part of the plan?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a number of impact metrics that we plan to track, but it starts with figuring out what the baseline is. And units, use, so number of uses, which effectively every use displaces something that would have gone to landfill or less and less to compost, given some of the new rules, but some of them may still be headed that direction. But we would focus on the landfill ones, of course. The tech piece of this makes tracking usage really easy. You need to track everything for inventory and tracking purposes anyway, so it'll be really easy to do that tracking when we get there. In terms of the baseline, that's still pretty manual. So I can tell you in Galveston, we have a team member on the ground in Galveston who has spoken to every restaurant in Galveston at least once, and some of them many times. And he talks to them about how many do you go through a week? How many do you go through in a month? What are you using? So there he's creating kind of a manual map of exactly how much is being used and where in the system. My hope is two things. I think we can do a version of that in Ann Arbor, but probably learn from, this is where our data science friends get really helpful, is that when we have really good data on restaurants with these characteristics tend to use this much these many cups and these many containers, then it becomes a lot easier to extrapolate some of that for other. So look at how different is a coffee shop in Galveston of a certain size or type than it would be in Ann Arbor. We can do some calibration to kind of test that based on data from Ann Arbor, and then we can get a better sense of how many cups, how many containers are being used in Ann Arbor. So that's sort of the data piece of it. I'm not sure if I've completely answered your question though.
Well, I think just knowing that you're going for data oriented as an approach is important. And related to that, I guess, do you feel like this is the place, to get the biggest bang for the buck on reducing plastics in our landfill? Is this the place?
Is Ann Arbor the place?
Not the city, no, the project.
I think that reuse has extraordinary potential to displace single-use plastics. I also think it's a huge system problem, and that's why we're doing it the way that we're doing it. I think Sam and Alex both gave really good points of reference on exactly kind of how we've thought about this and why we've ended up working on this particular piece of the problem. My sense is that if you think about the millions and billions of even just disposable cups that are getting used every day, if we could displace those, not just with reusable cups, but with systems to support their circulation, the impact is extraordinary. And it's not just landfill, it's greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of impacts that can come from this if it's done well. So I
think that's a way to help with the shift, once you start talking in that way.
We have some slides there. Thank you. No, that's super helpful. One of the things, and we can adapt this slide for Ann Arbor for sure, but we've done some of the math to say, okay, this many uses, Ann Arbor would have this many uses and would offset this many greenhouse gas emissions. But when we've proved the model in Ann Arbor, and then we look at the top 10 cities in the US, then we're offsetting millions of tons of plastic to landfill and millions of not thousands of tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So the scale gets really big but we're proving the case here. Like that's really what Ann Arbor can do, is create this model that can then be adopted and scaled much more broadly with that much larger impact. It's a catalyst project. Sorry, Sam, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I love the question. Yes. One other thing that I just want to highlight is that once you get it right for cups, once you have reverse and forward logistics, tracking, all that stuff, the possibilities for a detergent, for beer, for all these other platforms, the groundwork is laid. So it's a really exciting chance to say, we can do this. Once we can do it for one thing, we can do it for a lot of other things. And then I think about this a lot, like, is this where we want to be putting energy? And I think the reason I keep saying yes is exactly Lisa's question, the culture change thing. It's a very public, very ubiquitous way to start the little conversations along the lines of what Alex said. Like, this is about extraction. This is about more than just like, how do we throw stuff away better? It's about coming to a deeper understanding in the culture of Ann Arbor. And I think Ann Arbor is primed for it, like not many other places are, and we can lead the way here. But like getting that conversation, getting that understanding of like, oh, this is about upstream. This is actually has a human rights component. Like there is so much meat here that a little reusable container can be the sort of first step in that conversation. And I hope that we can, my dream is that this becomes something that can start those conversations and can help people better understand and support the culture change that I hope will happen over the next decade in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. I do have another couple of questions, but I want to go to Yusuf. Go ahead.
Well, just to follow up on what Sam was saying, I mean, when we have, of course, no decisions have been made, but when we were decided to kind of lean towards starting with cups, we just thought that cups were far more, when people are using cups, they're typically walking around, they're in their hand. If you're using containers, they're put in a bag, they're stowed away. And as a tool for kind of spreading awareness of this program and kind of nudging behavior in the right direction, cups are just so much more visual and might kind of accelerate that. that that change faster than other containers might.
Yeah, great. I think I need to close, but I just have two things that I want to mention. One is that the material, and I know in your full set of slides, there was a comparison of stainless steel versus plastic. And so I'm just curious about that, given that we're trying to do away with plastics, but we're talking about plastic containers. We don't really have to debate that right now. I think it's a question. And the other one is using one's personal utensils, one's own mug, one's own container to take food home is even less materials. Lisa's saying no, but okay. But anyway, I just thought I'd raise that.
No, I just meant that health codes, they won't let you. I mean, I've gone places and handed my own container. They're like, sorry, we cannot take that and give it back to you. I'm like, no one is looking. And they will.
Right. I know, but yet we can do bulk food, and we do. So I think maybe that's something that could be in the future, something to think about. Anyway, are there any other additional burning questions? Because we are a little longer than I had anticipated, but I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I appreciate all of your information and enthusiasm.
I'll just step in very briefly and say, just in regards to the governance, you saw on that slide that myself from OSI and Sarah Mason from Public Works and Jenny Petoskey from Public Works have been in on these meetings. And Perpetual and ZeroWaste.org are really helping us to think about these different models and these different ways that governance could happen. And we're having internal discussions about what the city's involvement will be. As has been said, that is still very much up in the air, but those conversations are happening. And we have a short list of other internal departments that we are going to be talking to about this sort of governance structure and thinking about talking to transportation and the Downtown Development Authority, because if we're going to be putting in these return bins, they're probably going to be on sidewalks. And so, we're thinking about all of these things and these internal conversations are happening within the city.
Okay, great. So with that, I'd like to move on to our next item, which I hope will be short. That is to close out. And once again, thank you all for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. It's great to
Thank you so much.
see a new
Really appreciate it.
concept. Okay, so our goal is to complete the review of our bylaws for the Environmental Commission. And I had some assistance from Commissioner Curtis and Commissioner Gruber, and we prepared a red line version of the bylaws, which we could go through if you'd like. And let me just ask, with a wave of hands, has everyone had a chance to read them? In which our goal was to integrate biodiversity into the bylaws and the whole concept of the work groups. Those are basically the points. Does anyone have any questions, and do you want to crawl through them and look at them? They're on 3 separate pages that I tallied. 4.
Admittedly, I have not. I looked at the agenda, the minutes, and this presentation, but I did not look at the bylaws. I don't know if anybody else did.
Why don't we, Sean, if you don't mind, pulling up the red line version of the bylaws. And what I'll say is that everything in red is the only thing that changed from what is currently approved bylaws. And here we go. This is in the first section. We advised adding to number 5 that we add challenges to biodiversity to those things that affect environmental risk and pollution issues. So the topic really is environmental risk and pollution issues, and we added challenges to biodiversity. In number 7, the focus is on matters related to sustainable development. We added biodiversity and those activities of the A20 carbon neutrality program that are associated with solid waste and natural features, as differentiated from A20 issues that address energy specifically and other aspects of A20.
A real quick comment there. Zero should all be capitalized. Carbon neutrality should be capitalized, and I would think plan instead of program. And I think we have to decide whether activities is right, or the plan uses the terminology strategies and actions. So I'll just throw those out there for consideration.
That seems good to keep things consistent. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments so far? Let's go on. All right, in this section where we are talking about enhancing awareness, understanding, and commitment to local citizens. And so we want to include in that stewardship of natural resources and enhancement of biodiversity. And then farther down, you can see we address the issue of work groups, just added to create subquorum work groups designated to report back to the commission as a whole. And that's one of the things that we designed in our work groups last month. And that would be followed by renumbering the ones that are currently numbered 15 and 16. And I think it's second last page. Yeah, good. A question. Oh, this isn't the last one. A question about our conflict of interest statement, and just how do we have an annual disclosure? So it's a question to the legal team to address what's the process. It's really not intended to be part of the bylaws. We're asking the legal team to advise us on how we do this. And the last. Seems so long now. Okay, here we go. The last one. The commission may create work groups, which was said, and the last statement is work groups are required to be subquorum. So it's just a parallel to the prior point in this document. Any other questions, corrections, comments? Commissioner Dish, Councilmember Dish.
I wonder if there's language that we could use other than local citizens.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little hard time hearing, please.
I'm sorry. I'm wondering if there's other language we can use other than local citizens, because that has a connotation for this exclusionary. So I'm wondering, members of the public.
Sure, that sounds good.
I don't think we want to necessarily.
Was that on that 15?
I don't remember which.
The new 15.
Yeah, there it is. 11. It's in 11. We might have more than one reference to that, but yeah, 11. There's local citizens.
Okay, so that is what's been in.
Yep.
So we didn't change it, but
no, I know
it's okay for me. From my perspective, I don't have any strong feeling about it. If you don't mind just saying again what you are suggesting.
Well, I'm kind of musing because it's a little difficult to figure out. We don't want to say local residents because there might be people from outside the city, that we want to be, in the county that we want to be involved with. I'm thinking really either just active involvement of members of the public.
Members of the community?
Community too. Yeah, maybe, yeah, that's a word that we use. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if Sean might want to tap on Jenny Petoskey's door and think if there's a word to use, because citizens in this day and age has a pretty intense connotation. of legitimacy and card carrying paper and documentation thing
But I-
that I don't think we
yeah.
want. And I'm sure that we have this in lots of city documents.
I bet we
So,
do.
yeah.
My suggestion then is that we do a word search on this and be sure it's not in other places, so that if we make this
Right.
change, that we might want to make sure we do it elsewhere as
Throughout
well.
the bylaws.
Yeah.
So I don't know, members of the public or community would be, I think, fine, but maybe I would check in with our public engagement specialist. Yeah.
How do we want to leave this? I was hoping, I see comments from Commissioner Nedrick. And
I just had a question about number 9. I think if you scroll up a little, about publishing and presenting an annual report. We didn't do that last year, did we?
No, we didn't. No,
is that a thing
it's a
that we've done
task.
in the past?
It's yeah, it has slipped, and so my goal will be to set up some kind of a template that we'll work on together. I certainly would prefer not to be the sole author of something like that, but to have input from the group, and maybe it'll be structured around our work groups, because we have those kind of levels of focus. That's what I'm thinking, but so do you have a question about it in particular, or are you just concerned that we make sure to do it?
I just think if it's in here, we should do it, or we should remove it if it's not feasible. Yeah, that's all I
think we should try and do it personally. Commissioner Mirsky.
I support the idea. The Energy Commission did it a few times. It's been a while, but it's a useful exercise. And I would recommend that if this is pursued, that Rita, you and Steve work together with the chair and vice chair of the Energy Commission, because the climate is in effect part of the environment. And I think a lot of things would carry over, and it certainly makes sense to have the two be similar. As to point 11, I would echo Councilmember Dish's point and recognize that people who live outside the city of Ann Arbor can serve as commissioners. They just need extra votes to be confirmed. And at least in the Energy Commission, we regularly have people calling in and providing public comment that live outside the city, but have ties to the city because they work here with the university or whatever. So coming up with some formulation here that is more inclusive and a little bit more broad is something I think is definitely worthwhile. And it should be potentially, since this I think is somewhat of a template that's used for other bylaws, this should be then shared with the city attorney's office, and they should look at that language across and do a read across all the other commission bylaws.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. Councilmember Dish, you have another comment?
I want to unmute first. I wanted to follow up on Commissioner Medrich's point. I'm not opposed to us doing 9, but an annual report on the city's state of the environment sounds very large. And I think it makes sense for us to report on our report. But I remember the first year I was on this commission, Chair Brown tried to have us do that, and it just was too much. And and also redundant, because the city does this. It doesn't do it in ways that are easy to find, but we would be using all kinds of city data and putting it into a report. And if we actually did what that says. So if you're thinking about a report on our activities, Chair Mitchell, I think, as you said, it might sort of center around our working groups. Is that what you meant? Or
that's what I was suggesting.
Done, right? Well, maybe we should reword this then, because if we did a report on what our working groups did, it would not add up to a report on the city's state of the environment.
It's definitely ambitious, right?
Yeah.
If I can chime in quickly on that, it's really important to think who is the audience and what are the objectives. And then we can design a report that meets that, as opposed to designing a hypothetical report with not really a clear understanding of what we want to accomplish and who it's for.
So I'm just going to interject that I had hoped we would finish these today and send them off to the legal team and get them to review. But if we need to review them, that can be done. And those are different aspects of the bylaws than what we talked about last time. So I guess I would ask the question of, does the commission want to proceed with the additional suggested revisions, finish those up, and bring them in and finalize it next time? That's my question. I'm trying to state it in a positive way so we can figure out an answer. Commissioner Dish and then Curtis.
Commissioner Curtis can go first.
So I would say yes, we should reword number 9 and make it realistic.
Okay, so how about if we just do that now? How about if we take 5 minutes and see if we can identify our audience and then reword it along the lines that Chair Mitch has already suggested. And then I would be happy for either we decide that we want to say, you know, members of the public or members of the community tonight, or we take advice and receive advice in an email from if Mr. Reynolds would be willing maybe to check in with Ms. Potosky, who does public engagement for solid waste, and can let us know the kind of words that she would use, because I bet she wouldn't use citizen. So, and then in terms of the report, I mean, the report has typically been conveyed to council as anything else from the Environmental Commission would be. And so council probably is the audience. And any members of the public who are so go-getter as to look at it, it might be them as well, which is good. But, you know, I think it'd be useful and interesting for council to know what the Environmental Commission and its working groups have done, because we're supposed to be advising council and surfacing, you know, policy issues that council is either not looking at or, you know, need to get a higher profile, or, you know, I can see utility to that. I can't see a utility to the state of the environment.
Hey, we weren't here when that was written, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that was a Matt Nod thing that was really, really ambitious and reflected lack of reporting around other things, you know, and we now have the Office of Sustainable Innovation. So I just don't see I don't see us wanting to do that work or having the capacity.
Right. No, it sounds massive. So I appreciate it being raised. So I propose that we report to council. And the question is, how do we want to word the rest? We're going to report to council on actions of the work groups, on
activities of
recommendations. About activities and recommendations of the work groups?
Maybe activities of the work groups and recommendations drawing from the work groups and the body as a whole.
I'm running out of paper that has not got stuff on both sides.
You need an iPad with a stylus.
Okay, I can pick that up. Okay. All right, let's try it again. Activities of the work groups report to council on activities of the work groups that include recommendations, that may include recommendations?
I know there's a hesitancy to do this, but I think redlining in a meeting like this is very
Terrible. Yeah.
I really,
Okay.
we've already discussed everything. I think it would be great if you could just bring a new version back and we dispose of it
Okay.
in 5 minutes. That's
I'm
my
willing to do
recommendation.
that. Anyone else? Let's do that. I will put it together. I don't think there's that much more. I'll leave the red lines that we have to date and add these particular items. So great. Thanks all of you for your comments. So let's get back to that's the end of our scheduled agenda items. Let's see. I will ask, does anyone have any particular items that you would like to bring up for our next meeting, which will be October 28th, I believe, or 26th. I looked at that. October 26th. If I don't hear anyone in 30 seconds, I will work on it and put out a call. Okay. Our next scheduled meeting. We're now at a point for, oh, wait a minute. I'm jumped way ahead to, we're at reports from committees. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I was more organized than that. All right. I'm going to just call them out. We have our new, I'm going to put them in alphabetical order. We have our new biodiversity group that includes myself, Commissioners Curtis, Mirsky, Gruber, Dale, and Graham. It is going to be chaired by Commissioner Graham. And would anyone like to report on our first meeting that we had 2 weeks ago? I will.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Good. Go.
I'd say we had a meeting. We bounced around a number of different ideas. I don't think we really want to get into them in detail here because we're still trying to figure out what will work or what won't work. But everybody came, so that was good. And we got some assignments out there. And so some things are moving.
Yep. And I will say that we're hoping to bring some information to the group or some discussion to the group for all of us to talk about, which I think will be really fun. Okay, circular economy. Councilmember Dish, do you want to take this or otherwise I'll read?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So the circular economy group as a whole is meeting monthly. And it has some other sub meetings of sub working groups. And we are right now reviewing a combination of ordinances in other cities and best practices in other cities around construction and demolition ordinances. We are trying to come up with a definition of, well, it's C&D ordinances. So sometimes people call it construction and demolition. Actually, what we want to call it and think about it as is a question. Do you mean deconstruction? Because that may end up being what we end up targeting. We are also at the same time having conversations with cities that have had these ordinances in place because we want to understand what sorts of businesses they need to have in place and what kind of markets they need in order for these C&D ordinances to actually work. Because you can't mandate something if it can't be deconstructed and sold or done something with. And right now it looks like crushing concrete is extremely easy to do and to have done. But I'm not sure how great that is from an environmental perspective. So we are going to be continuing to doing this kind of market capacity research and other cities' ordinance research, and we're making a SWOT analysis of it. In October, for our meeting later next month, we'll be talking with representatives from Madison, Wisconsin about their experience with their C&D ordinance, and we're also going to have a meeting lined up with Austin, Texas. And we're taking these as kind of a preliminary, exploring how to meet with people that have them, and then we would do a more systematic engagement effort, and a broader engagement effort, so that we can identify what, if anything, can be accomplished in Ann Arbor around this. We want to do something, and so we would at some point be able to bring you some conclusions from our research and outreach, but right now we're too much at the beginning stage, and it would be boring because we're sifting through websites and stuff.
Okay. Sounds like it will be really good. Let's go to the Energy Commission. Commissioner Mirsky.
Really, the only thing of note is that the Energy Commission considered in a first reading a resolution recommending a carbon impact fee for new construction, effectively a social cost of carbon. The approach is modeled after a fee based system that was implemented in Burlington, Vermont. I know that that probably is not viewed favorably outside the commission, but the commission generally was supportive of it. There was a lot of discussion about a number of concerns, and there was a vote at the end to table it and bring it back for a second reading and discussion, so it wasn't dropped. So that was really the main agenda topic for the Energy Commission.
Thank you. Water quality. Commissioner Nedrick, it's you and me and Steve Brown, who's not here.
Yeah. I don't think we've met since the last. I know I've had some back and forth with Steve. He's working on the Polluter Accountability Act revisions. That's state level legislation, but if it does go to the state Congress and get passed, it could have really big implications for the Gelman dioxin plume, because some of what they're proposing is a little bit more strict. So that's
Great.
very interesting.
Right.
And I know, Rita, you sent me some emails about Gelman as well that were going around regarding concerns about the monitoring well network not being protective enough, particularly in the Scioto Township area, which is outside of the city limits. But
yeah,
but so there's been a lot of Gelman stuff going about.
Right. And I think that the issue with that has to do with the flow toward our city water source in Barton Pond. So even though that's outside of, much of that is outside of the city limits, it's certainly a concern. So yeah, stay tuned. All right, let's move on to, thank you. Let's move on to Planning Commission. Again, Councilmember Dish.
I don't think we haven't done anything that bears directly on this commission. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Parks, Commissioner Marson.
Hi. Yeah. So going back a couple of meetings, we approved moving forward on an acquisition of an addition to the Hanson Nature Area. It'll be about 1 acre that will be added. I think you've probably all heard that there's oak wilt that's been uncovered in Bird Hills. And at the last meeting here, we discussed issue MDOT, who owns the railroad tracks that run along the river. They will be putting up some fencing that's somewhat controversial, I guess, for citizens that live along the river and would like to have access to all of the to the river and parks along the river. But there is going to be a public meeting about that this coming week. I believe it's on Tuesday, and it's going to be at I think it's over at Washtenaw Community College, perhaps. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And then the other environmental commission related item is that Parks and Urban Forestry received a $1 million grant from the USDA Forest Forest Management, Forest Service, for urban forest management. And so I think there'll be some more activity along those lines in the upcoming months. And that's it.
That's great. Thank you.
Is there any specificity as to how those have to be used or how they're planned to be used?
I am not familiar with that. We were mostly just notified that they received the grant.
I can take that as I was one of the folks who helped to submit the grant. So the funding will be going towards in the first year primarily doing a new canopy analysis to see where we need to put in more trees to help our canopy. We'll then be using that and equity data to drive decisions around the second year and moving forward, which will be focused on private property tree planting through the 10,000 Trees Initiative that the Office of Sustainability Innovations runs. There will also be funding that goes towards natural area preservation for their strategic planning. And then finally, some of it in, I believe, the fourth year is going to go towards a feasibility study to determine if the city and or county could start their own tree nursery to grow our own trees for these programs.
Thank you.
Pretty exciting. All right. Councilmember Dish, back to you. Anything from council that is important for the Environmental Commission to know?
Oh, I'm not used to having to do all these reports.
I
Okay.
know, so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's just I didn't think about that. I mean, we haven't taken anything direct. We haven't taken any action directly on anything that bears on this commission. But I promise next time I'll review my notes.
Okay. All right.
And let you know.
All right. Thank
And
you.
if Mr. Reynolds has anything that pops to mind,
All right. Well, I'll just make a quick chair's report, which is really short. We have a couple of youth candidates that we'll be reviewing, and I'm hoping we'll make a decision soon and a recommendation. I want to congratulate Commissioner Curtis for visiting every park and being a top NAP volunteer. You keep getting written up. It's really good. Thanks for all that work. And I want to thank Sean for organizing the pollinator walk that happened on September 10th. It was really a great day. We had a small-ish kind of group of people that showed up, but they were, for a self-selected group, they were all really interested in pollinator plants and pollinators and taking walks around town. And I appreciate the support from Anya and others, the wild ones who came as well. It was a good and fun event. So that is my, and I don't have any word yet on the environmental manager, but I will let you know soon on that decision and how it affects our commission. I expect to know next week. So with that, I'm back on the agenda. We did our reports. Report from staff. Sean submitted his report. Thank you very much, Sean. And we did through any other items for the agenda anybody thought of in the meantime. Raise your hand or send me an email. Our next scheduled meeting, October 26th. And now we're at a point for our second public comment. Here we go. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 922-9696-1664. I'll say that again, 922-9696-1644. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand, please press *9 on your phone. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Press the *6 to unmute your phone, and when speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Sean, do you see anyone waiting to speak to us?
Not yet.
Okay, we'll give a brief pause. I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. I think it's very interesting and to see where we're going to go with this, the reusables. Very, very interesting. Okay. How about that? That was my interlude. Sean, anyone waiting to talk?
We do not have anyone on the line.
All right. Then I would like to have a motion to close the meeting. Commissioner Curtis, second from Commissioner Gruber. Thank you very much. Vote to adjourn the meeting. Raise your hand. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Good night.